Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's begin today's session of comprehensive news analysis of the Hindu newspaper. The first article that we have for you today talks about the deteriorating condition of legal education in India. The author here makes a point that the national law universities in India, as pointed out by the respected Chief Justice of India, has become a center of elitist society and they are working far away from the social realities. The people who are passing out of these prestigious universities don't have the kind of caliber that is required in the real life to give justice to the people who come to them. The article says that there are a lot of deficiencies that can be seen in the working of the national law universities, and there are many reasons why this is the scenario of legal education in India. Recently, the Chief Justice of India, Shri N.V. Ramanna, had made a few statements regarding the status of legal education in India. He said that the national law universities are not seeing enough students joining the bar. Not just this, he said that the people who are passing out of these universities are more interested in starting their practice straight away at the Supreme Court and at the High Court levels rather than going through the grind and starting their career at the lower judiciary to learn the tricks of the trade. He also lamented about the substandard legal education that is being imparted to the students in the country. The author here takes this argument forward and says that the law graduates in India right now are ill equipped to handle the profession and the challenges that come with it. This is because the focus of these courses mainly is on teaching theory to the students and not making them practice or implement that theory. This is where the national law universities have to change their pedagogy and make sure that they have qualified teachers at their disposal to train the students in the best possible scenario. The article says that the NLUs have been described as islands of excellence in a sea of mediocrity. Although this article does not tell you who said this statement, this is actually a statement made by Dr. Manmohan Singh when he was a Prime Minister. Through this statement, he wanted to point out that amidst all the substandard legal education colleges in India, the NLUs are the guiding light and they can be trusted in giving good education. But the author, as well as the Chief Justice of India, say that the standard of NLUs has declined considerably. Let's look into the reasons why this has happened. The author says that the NLUs are criticized because they mainly focus on getting their students placed in corporates that offer fat paychecks. However, the irony is that the ranking of NLUs or the prestige of NLUs is based on the same criteria. That is, if an institution is able to place half of its students with good pay packages in the corporate world, they are considered as a great institution. Since we are pushing them towards this particular side, we can't blame the NLUs for focusing only on the corporate scene. The second problem is that the name NLU, National Law University, is itself a misnomer. If I tell you National Law University, the first reaction that you would have is that these are run and maintained by the central government, which is not really the case. They are established and partially funded by the state governments, and the funding from the state governments for these organizations is constantly declining. Because they are run and supported mainly by the state governments, the states are also able to exert a lot of influence over them. For example, many of these institutions have domicile based reservations. The state governments decide the pay scale of the teachers, so on and so forth. That is why there's a lot of disparity between the different NLUs that exist within the country. Right now, the pedagogy and syllabus that is followed by the NLU is decided by the Bar Council of India and the University Grants Commission. The author here says that it is time to change that. The pedagogy of these institutions must be much more research driven. Rather than reading about the theory and old cases, they should read about what are the contemporary issues that are being faced by the lawyers and by the legal fraternity these days around the world. That is why we need to have separate faculties for teaching and for research, and both of these should not be mixed up because research is very different as compared to teaching. In the past decade or so, a lot of private universities have come up with a lot of funding which enables them to hire quality faculties having foreign exposure. That is why the NLUs are not being able to compete with such universities. Not just this, there are also a lot of administrative issues within the NLUs which are leading to frequent protest, by the students who are studying there. It all finally comes down to the problem of shrinking and withdrawn funding from these institutions by the state government. One of the suggestions given by the authors is that our judges and advocates should be obligated to contribute to the classrooms and visit the NLUs much more frequently and offer internships to the students to learn the craft on the job. We must also understand that education at graduate and undergraduate levels cannot be the same. While at the graduate level, the focus should be on practicing, at the postgraduate level, focus must be on imparting students practical skills and on applying the knowledge that they have already gained at the graduate level. Now, it's also interesting to note how did the NLUs come into being? If they were not established by the center government, then how exactly were they established? And what are the suggestions that have been given by other experts to improve the working of the NLUs? The history of NLUs goes back to 1980s, and interestingly, we have to give credit to certain chief ministers in India behind the establishment of such organizations. In 1980s, the Karnataka chief minister supported the establishment of a National Law School of India University in Bangalore. After this came up, the chief ministers in Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, and Odisha also copied the idea and set up institutions with similar names. Thus, since their inception, they have mainly been supported by the state governments and its funding. That is why many of them run differently and have slightly different names. For example, you have the NLU in Assam, NLU in Delhi, then you have the Nalsar University in Hyderabad. All of them, however, are considered at the same level. In the past, multiple bills have been introduced in the parliament to bring the NLUs under the control of the central government. The last of those bills was introduced by the BJP MP Meenakshi Lekhi, who herself is a lawyer. These bills wanted to declare the national universities as institutes of national importance and bring them at par with the IITs, IIMs, etc. to give them a standardized structure. Not just this, the central government funding should flow into these institutions and there should be a common governance structure. For example, the Chief Justice of India, Chief Justices of respective high courts, as chancellors, should work in these universities. The debate of reforming these legal institutes in India is not new. In 2017, the Madras High Court said that 85% of law colleges in India must be closed because they provide below par education. However, the irony is that the number of law colleges in India is on a constant increase. We had about 800 of such colleges in the year 2000, which almost doubled by the year 2019. The other reform suggested is that the Bar Council of India has too many functions on its hand. They are responsible for law reforms, for disciplining lawyers, for setting standards, for legal education, and much more. Thus, they should be relieved of the legal education functions, and an empowered committee of academicians, chief justices, and eminent lawyers must be set up in this regard. We should also know a bit more about the Bar Council of India. It is a statutory body created in 1961 to regulate and represent the Indian bar. Bar means the registered Indian advocates. It performs regulatory functions by prescribing standards of professional conduct and etiquettes and exercising disciplinary jurisdiction. So, for example, if a lawyer does not behave well, if a lawyer is not following the professional etiquettes, then the Bar Council of India can take action against the lawyer, can even suspend the license of the lawyers. It also sets standards for legal education and grants recognition to the universities which offer law courses in India. As you can see, the bar has been given a lot of functions, and that is why the recommendation is to transfer the functions of legal education to an expert committee. The next article that we have talks about the Indian economy and how exactly is it recovering in the wake of the possible third wave. This small article gives a lot of data about the recent numbers released with regards to the Indian economy. The most recent numbers indicate that India's export in services is declining. However, on the other hand, our export in merchandise is increasing, and in fact, it has hit a record high in December. Although it is a positive sign, but overall the picture is not great because as compared to our exports, our imports have also increased. So we are importing a lot more things as compared to what we were. That is why our trade deficit is still at $22 billion. The GST collection from December was about 1.3 lakh crore. Anything above 1 lakh crore is usually considered as a healthy GST collection in India. The other data points include a reduction in the custom duty and a loss in jobs, especially in manufacturing and services, which is a negative sign for the Indian economy overall. The article also says that because of the increasing coronavirus cases in the US government itself is expected to revive its own economy, and thus it is expected that the US Federal Reserve will increase its interest rates, which will be a challenge for India. Now, why is that so? We'll just discuss in a bit. The government of India also should expand its spending on healthcare, including the spending on COVID booster shots, to provide much more impetus to the Indian economy to ensure that people are fit and healthy to take up more jobs. While our manufacturing sector suffered major losses in the first wave, we have been able to handle the second wave much better in terms of job losses. It is expected that with many more people being vaccinated and with the experience that we have had with the first two waves, even if the third wave does hit India, we would be in a much better position to handle at least our manufacturing and services sector. The government, however, needs to be active and take appropriate action as and when required in these job sectors. Now, you keep on hearing that the GST collections are increasing or decreasing month by month. So, let me give you a comparison of how the GST collections have changed in India over the past few months. This is a graph that indicates the trend in GST collections. As you can see, the GST collections in December was about 1.3 lakh crore, to be exact 1 lakh 29,780 crore, which is pretty healthy. But if you see, it is lower than the last 2 months. In November, it was 1.31 crore. In October also it was about 1.3 crore. So the last 3 months have shown a good GST collection. The biggest GST collection this year, however, was witnessed in the month of April with almost 1.4 crore coming into the government coffers. The graph also shows you the downfall that we saw during the first wave of coronavirus in April 2020 when the GST collection fell down to only 32,000 crore, that is the lowest ever. As compared to last year, at least, the GST collections are much more healthy. Similarly, I want to show you the trends of India's exports and imports so that you can compare how we are performing year after year. In terms of merchandise, in November 2021, as you can see, our export has increased considerably as compared to last November. However, so has our imports. As you can see, imports in November 2021 for merchandise is about $53 billion dollars as compared to $33 billion dollars of last November. That is why the trade balance overall is minus $22.9 billion dollars in November, which is at an all time high. For services, however, we are performing better. In terms of services, we are in a positive trade balance, that is about $8.5 billion dollars. We have exported more services as compared to what we have imported. However, the gains in the services is not enough to offset the loss that we are making in the merchandise sector. That is why overall merchandise and trade balance is against India, and we are importing goods worth $14.39 billion dollars more than what we are exporting. This is a negative sign since the trade balance in November 2020 and 2019 was much lower than what we have right now. Also, as we discussed in the article, that the US Feds are expected to increase their interest rate. Now, what impact would it have in India? In very simple terms, the Indian market has a lot of foreign investment. Let's take a very simple example. Any billionaire in the US invests his or her money into India. Why? Because he thinks that he will get a better rate of interest in India than what is being offered in the US. Now, tomorrow, if the US government says, bring your money back, we will give you a higher rate of interest, then obviously most of these billionaires will take out money from the Indian market and invest it in the US because for them, US is much more reliable, US economy is much more robust. The only reason why they came to India was in search of a higher rate of interest. So whenever the US Fed increases a rate of interest, there is always an outflow of funds from the Indian market, which forces the Indian government and the Indian RBI itself to raise the interest rates to compete with that of the US interest rates. So, if and when the US central bank increases the reserve rate, we will most definitely see the RBI also following the same in order to prevent the global funds from going out. Whenever there is an outflow of foreign funds from the Indian market, it is seen that the rupee gets weakened and the dollar gets stronger, which again poses a challenge for the Indian government. The next article that we have talks about a news that has been covered extensively in the past couple of days, ever since we have seen the satellite images showing that China is now building a bridge over the Pangong Tso Lake to ensure that the movement of its troops and weaponry becomes much easier. Now, what exactly is the current situation in eastern Ladakh? At present, the two countries are working out details to carry out the 14th round of the talks that have been happening since the two sides faced off each other in May 2020 in the Galwan Valley. The last round of talks did not have any conclusion. In fact, after the last round of talks had ended, both the sides had issued inflammatory statements, which was not considered as a positive sign at all. Both the sides at the same time have been building up the presence of their troops on either side of the LAC, with about 1 lakh soldiers on both sides dug in to spend the long and extreme winter season in the high altitude region. Now, it's not that no progress has been made so far in these round of talks. The two sides have talked about disengagement from both the banks of the Pangong Tso last year and from Gogra Valley in August. However, there are still many areas that are still to be resolved, such as the Hot Springs, the Demchok area, and the Depsang area. Now, a lot has been said and reported about this bridge that the Chinese side is building. Essentially, the bridge is in the Chinese territory only, so we can't stop China from building that. It is located around 25 kilometers ahead of the LAC in the Chinese territory and will significantly reduce the time taken for the Chinese Liberation Army to move its troops. Mainly, it will cut down about 4 to 5 hours in their troop movement. As you would know, a few weeks after the Galwan clashes, the Indian army gained a tactical advantage on the south bank of the Pangong Tso Lake by taking over many peaks which were lying vacant since 1962, which gave Indian army a good view of the Chinese area. The Chinese since then have been trying to counter this Indian move, and this building of the bridge is seen as a move in that direction only. The two sides have even deployed their tanks at the height of about 15,000 feet, and shots were also fired in the air for the first time in many decades. Unfortunately, India only had to worry about one border for many years, but now our attention is divided between both our borders in the northern region. Now, India controls about one third of the Pangong Tso Lake, while two-thirds of the lake is under the Chinese territory. The bridge is built within the Chinese territory, as I said earlier, and that is why India cannot forcibly stop China from doing that. You also must understand that the building of infrastructure nearby the border is not a new occurrence. In fact, the Indian side also has been extremely proactive in building multiple infrastructures nearby the border area. For instance, we have taken up development of roads, bridges, tunnels along the LAC. In fact, the speed of our construction of infrastructure is one of the reasons that had forced China to be so proactive in the LAC area. Not just this, the Indian army ahead of the winter has also stocked up on the ration, the specialized fuel and ammunition that the troops may need when they are spending long days at the LAC. Now, you have read about this issue multiple times, but understanding the geography of this area is not very easy. Let me try and explain it to you with the help of two graphs. The first graph is this. If you can see on the eastern side of Ladakh, you will see that this dotted line is what we call the LAC. The Galwan Valley is the area where the unfortunate clashes took place, where Indian and the Chinese army soldiers lost their lives. Hot Springs is one of those areas which has still not been resolved. This is the Pangong Tso Lake. As you can see, a lot of its part is still under the Chinese control. This part of the Pangong Tso Lake is where Chinese army is building its bridge so that the movement of its troops can be made much easier. Let's also take a closer look at the graph of the Pangong Tso Lake. In many news articles, you would have heard about finger 1, 2, 3, 4, up till finger 8. Now, these finger like structures are actually the banks of the Pangong Tso Lake. The orange and the green line indicate India and China's version of the borders. As per India, this is our border, so till this point, it is Indian area. On the other hand, the orange line is made by China. According to them, India's border ends at finger 4. However, as per India's claim, our border ends at finger 8 and not finger 4. As per the round of talks right now, no army is patrolling the area between the fingers 4 and 8. So the areas between fingers 4 and 8 has been demilitarized, which is seen as a negative sign for India because earlier the Indian troops used to patrol till finger 8. But now, as per the negotiation talks, at least for now, the area between finger 4 and finger 8 is being used as a buffer zone. The next article that we have talks about an interesting problem that Kerala is facing right now. That is the problem of granite scarcity. Now, granite, as you know, is a very, very important manufacturing material. It is used in the manufacturing of households, offices, sculptures, and basically any heavy material that you want to build will require certain amount of granite. Now, the Kerala government over the past few months has been passing a lot of infrastructure projects, including the famous Silver Line semi high speed railway line, which will connect north and the south part of Kerala. The problem, however, is that in these projects, you would require a lot of granite to be supplied, which the Kerala state is not being able to find. Now, Kerala usually does have a lot of granite manufacturing, but over the past few years, the government of Kerala has banned a lot of granite manufacturing sites. The reason why they did that was number one, because in these sites, the granite has to be extracted using machines. It leads to possibility of landslides. Because many of these areas are visited by tourists year round, the Kerala government did not want to take a chance and they banned quarrying of granite from a lot of these sites. Quarrying means extraction of the minerals. The other reason why they banned it was that there was a lot of protest from the environmental groups saying that the mineral extraction activity harms the environment considerably. But now Kerala is facing the brunt of all those decisions. The shortage of construction materials, specifically granite, is now leading to curbs in the construction projects that are going on inside the state. Because of shortage of granite, automatically the prices of granites are increasing and the ongoing projects are being delayed, including the Vizinjam port project and many other projects already passed by the state. One of the hardest hit districts is the district of Wayanad, where a ban on the quarrying in the revenue land has been enforced for some time, and that is why the supply of granite has been held up. As I said, almost all types of constructions require granite in some order or the other. The government of Kerala banned the quarrying of granite about 6 years ago at places such as Krishnagiri village, Ambala Vayal, and others which are considered as biodiversity hotspots and are visited by many tourists throughout the year. Due to this ban, about 150 granite units that were working in this area have now only come down to 6 units, and that is why they are not being able to fulfill the demand for granite, leading to a high increase in the cost of granite throughout the state. These 6 units, which are functional right now, are charging a premium for the supply of their material. The other option that these projects have is that they can ask the other states to supply granite for their construction projects. But you have to understand that granite is a very heavy material. So transporting granite to Wayanad using thousands of multi-axle trucks in an area which is considered as a biodiversity hotspot will again be against the values of environmental conservation. And these heavy trucks, even if one of them breaks down on those narrow roads, it will completely disturb the traffic even for essential vehicles such as ambulances. Thus, the government has to find an alternative to this problem. The other districts in Kerala, which are also facing a shortage, are trying to source their granite from Tamil Nadu and from other parts of the state, such as from Thiruvananthapuram. Now, I'm sure all of you would have read and heard about granite. Has grains large enough that can be visible from the naked eye. Close to 70% of the Earth's crust is made up of granite. which has two main components, that is feldspar and quartz. It is used in multiple indoor and outdoor projects such as building of bridges, monuments, buildings, floors, countertops, etc. And that is why it is an essential part of any construction in urban or rural area. Apart from this, it is also used in some variety in making of jewelry, fireplace, bathroom skins, etc. The next article again takes us back to the problems between India and China. This article takes an extremely negative view of the ongoing government policies against China. In fact, the article author says that the government of India has absolutely nothing in their mind to counter China, and there is complete lack of any policy measure that we see right now being taken by New Delhi. As per the author, the best case scenario for India would be to now not give any more territory to China from the LAC and not expect anything else in return. The author says that the defeat of 1962 war is still playing on the minds of the Indians, although we do not have any connection to that war right now. Apart from building the bridge at the Pangong Tso Lake, China has been taking up multiple activities to push India in a corner. For example, China recently renamed 15 places in Arunachal Pradesh. They did the same in 2017, some weeks after Dalai Lama had visited Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. China justifies this, saying that Arunachal Pradesh, in fact, is southern Tibet and has always been a part of the Chinese Empire. China also recently released a propaganda video in which its soldiers were seen unfurling the Chinese flag in the Galwan Valley, while the reality was that the place where this was happening was well within the Chinese territory. The other step that China just took was releasing the new land border law, which came into force on 1st of January 2022, which gives the PLA complete responsibility to take steps against invasion, infiltration of China and safeguard the Chinese territory. Since this law came at a time when Chinese and the Indian army are face to face at the LAC, it is no doubt that this law came into being with an eye on India. This law also supports the Chinese activity of building villages near the disputed border with India so that it can later claim that the Chinese people have been living in this area for a long time. Now, as per the author, as I said, the Indian government has run out of options to act against Beijing. We used to think that having good relationship with Tibet and Dalai Lama will be a trump card for India against China, but it has not turned out to be so. Rather than taking steps against China, our trade is increasingly being dependent on China. In the recent trade numbers that came out, our trade with China is at an all time high, and so is our trade deficit. Our dependency on Chinese manufacturing has only increased during the COVID pandemic. The author says that the best that we can do now is to prevent any further territory loss to China by deploying extensive military on the LAC. The recent Chinese aggression has forced India to focus much more on the Chinese border as compared to the Pakistan border. Not just this, we have had to evaluate the presence of the army and shift a lot of troops from the Pakistan border to the Chinese border because of what has been happening in the past 18 months or so. India had thought that coming closer to the US by forming the Quad would help India in countering China, but that has not been the case, since Quad is essentially a non-military alliance. Not just this, US has been focusing much more on AUKUS, and that is why India has been left behind to fight for itself. The author says with the US not really saying a lot of things in support of India, India's last remaining hope is Russia. We hope that Russia will play the intermediate role between India and China. Vladimir Putin, who just visited India, had a talk with Xi Jinping also, where he updated him on the Indian point of view with regards to the issue at the LAC. The author also notes that ever since China has become so proactive at the LAC, India has not been making statements against Pakistan that the government used to do earlier. For any country, it is extremely difficult to fight a two front war, and India is no different. The author criticizes the Prime Minister, saying that this situation did not develop overnight. The signs were visible from almost a decade ago, when rather than focusing on important issues, the Prime Minister hosted Xi Jinping in Ahmedabad in 2014. Then in 2017, the Doklam issue took place when the Chinese premier was in India itself. and then the border crisis of 2020. The author says that this crisis has long been in the making, and it is our mistake if we did not see it coming from far away. The lack of proactiveness from the Indian side can also be seen in the fact that since Prime Minister Modi took charge, he had met or talked to Xi Jinping at least 18 times. But ever since the border crisis began, there has not even been a direct telephone call between the two leaders. Thus, it seemed that the Indian leadership and the Indian government does not know how to react to the ongoing crisis, and thus the Prime Minister now has to take this last chance in his own hand because the diplomatic and other channels have failed to deliver the results that the Indian government had wanted. Now let's also take a look at what exactly does China's new border law says. The new border law of China came into being on 1st of Jan 2022 and tries to clearly mark the border of China by setting up boundary markers on all its borders. It gives a responsibility to the Chinese army and the Chinese people's armed police force to maintain security along the border. Not just this, the law also says that the country's border can be sealed in the event of a war, armed conflict, or any other biological or chemical accident or natural disasters. The law interestingly also says that the government will try and have increased settlement of civilian population and infrastructure along the border area, which is what China has just done nearby Arunachal Pradesh. China, in fact, has previously used this strategy to move its civilian population in these parts so that they can claim the rightful ownership of these areas. Interestingly, China used to have border disputes with as many as 14 nations, but as of now, the unresolved border issues of China are only with two nations, that is India and Bhutan. With Bhutan also, China had signed a memorandum of understanding saying that we should have a three-step roadmap to ensure that our boundary issues are resolved. Just a few days back, we had discussed about China's new border law in one of the other CNAs, the link to which is given on the screen. You can click and watch that discussion as well. These were the articles that we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, list out the important applications of granite. Discuss the issues that can possibly lead to the shortage of granite in India. Second, in wake of the ongoing Chinese aggression, India needs a comprehensive strategy to solve the border issues with China. Discuss. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.